Okay, so I think we've kicked off, or you can probably see me at least. So we'll just wait just a little bit longer to see if we have any other people joining on. Well, we'll at least get started on the sort of Codemotion part, and we'll see if other people come along and join us in a minute. So welcome along to this webinar, part of the Codemotion webinar series. Codemotion is a multi-channel platform helping developers in their professional growth. So it's the biggest tech conference for developers in EMEA, open to all languages and technology. So they organise many events for developers, such as tech meetups, webinars, so like the one that you're looking at now, hackathons and training courses. There's a bunch of conferences coming up. You might be able to tell from my accent, but they're all very far away from me. So Madrid, Berlin. Hopefully it's closer to where you are, or hopefully I can make it there one day to one of these conferences, because I'm sure they're pretty exciting. So feel free to check out the Codemotion platform. They've launched that recently, and you'll find videos of events, articles, interviews, and likely recordings of webinars like this one. So we're going to be talking about commuting as a developer. So I think we can all agree commuting is the best part of our day, right? It is a bit of a reality for most of us, and it can feel like we're just sort of sitting in a sea of traffic a lot of the time. There's kind of where we live and where we work, and between those is the commute. They tend to be separate places. But I was chatting with some remote workers, and even they tend to get out of the house and have like mini commutes sometimes to break up their day. At least here in Australia, where I am, 69% of people choose to drive. And that was true for me as well. I would get up in the morning, get in my car and go to work, and then do the opposite in the way home. Now, what happens during that time, right? Have you ever kind of arrived at work and found yourself wondering, well, how did I get here? You don't particularly remember the journey. You're pretty sure you didn't break any laws. And that certainly summed up my journey, right? So who am I? Anton Ball. As I mentioned, I'm in Perth, Western Australia, so I work at 7 West Media. We make 7 News, with the West Perth Now websites. And like probably a lot of you, I have to commute to work. And that's kind of where my story begins around this talk. I've found my commute really frustrating, right? There's constant starting and stopping, occasional anger and annoyance, either from me to other drivers or them at me. And it's really sort of easy to fall in the trap of getting unreasonably annoyed at someone in traffic, right? I'm sure it's happened to a lot of us. We tend to blame outwards for the journey taking too long. And there's so many signs to tell someone that they've wronged you in traffic, and only a few signs to say, whoops, my mistake. And I have a bit of a fun stat on that one a little bit later in this talk. But we want to get where we're going, and everyone and everything tends to be in our way to getting there. It was kind of boring for me. Like, what was there to do in that time? And if you're like me, I like to disconnect between work and home, particularly now with a young child. It's something I needed for my mental health. And with the start of a young family, you also start considering your impact and how you can be a bit of a better citizen. So as I started looking into this, some stats I found out is the average commute in Australia is 4.5 hours. We already know that we sit for too long in this job, but there's extra sitting, and driving tends to cause us stress, which we know is bad for our mental health. Driving to work, we're more likely to have health issues, sleep poorly, and be psychologically distressed. And with that research done, I was feeling a bit stressed, right? Which, as we know, is not good for my health. So with all of that information, I thought to myself, well, why not start looking at options that I have available and how they can impact my day? Typically, we just look at time and money as the sole sort of factors about commute, but there are other important factors, and I wanted to look at those as well. And so this is where my test was born, transport-driven development, or TDD for short. Now, as tech people, we particularly say developers, but anyone in tech, we tend to be pragmatic. We research options. If you're starting a new project, you're going to dive into all the different frameworks and how they might best meet the criteria of your project. You've likely even played with a lot of frameworks just in your own time because that's something that we do. So I wanted to apply that same process and that same thinking to my commute. But let's quickly break down what my commute looks like. Distance I travel is roughly 16 kilometers. I'm not sure if you use miles up there, but for here it's 16 kilometers. I'll let you do the conversion. And there's many different ways I could achieve this journey. Here in Perth, we have this chap and he rides his unicycle to work. You'll actually see him going along the pathway. Now, you must be living your best life if a unicycle is a viable method of transport for you, right? In Sydney, there was this guy who got so sick of traffic that he started swimming across the harbour in order to get to work, though probably not the best idea. I had a quick look at the river here that I would have to cross, and it's about 2 kilometres wide, and I don't think I have the stamina in order to be able to do that. So I struck off unicycle and swimming from my commute. Instead, I wanted to focus on transport options that I had readily available for me. So that was car, public transport, and cycling. And with that, how would I kind of record my results? A really simple way is with the Apple Watch and iPhone. I can track travel time, sitting time, calories, exercise minutes, heart rates, and a bunch of other things. And all of that information I would throw into a spreadsheet, and that's how I would see my results at the end. So with any good test, there's a few rules, right? Things that we need to succeed at. And I would start and stop the timer from the door of my home to the door of the office to try and get some consistency. When I could use my phone, I was going to avoid using infinite scrolling apps. So think Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's not to judge, I don't have anything against them, but I certainly hatched plenty of Pokemon eggs during my walk to work, for example, but I wanted to see what I could achieve with the time that I had available. And the third and probably most important rule is no work. So no doing the thing that I'm already commuting to work to do. So that's emails and coding for my job. There's room for planning, and we'll see that in a little bit, but if you're like me, sometimes it's difficult to break away from your day-to-day work. And so that's why I considered this one an important rule. Now, I'm going to admit this early. I cheated in the cycling test, right? I used an electric bike. I know that sounds bad, but hear me out. Even though it's electric, I'm still required to pedal, right? You can't get away with it. The engine doesn't work. That means I'm still getting the health benefits, which we'll see soon. It just made life a little bit easier because I didn't have to physically train in order to get to work. Adding electricity, it's a great way to get into cycling, right? Because you're not a sweaty mess by the time you arrive at your work. So instead of cheat, let's say it's the smart option for cycling. It's smart cycling. So with that omission and rundown of the rules and methodology, we'll get into the first test's criteria, and that was time. It can be a big factor when considering your commute. We mostly want to be done with this as fast as possible, right? In the introduction, I mentioned that the average time is about 4.5 hours in Australia, but those times are on the way up. In Sydney, it's now up to 71 minutes a day, up from 61 minutes in 2002. And on Perth, the other side of Australia, so where I am, it's 61 minutes a day, up from 59 minutes in 2002. But over the duration of the test, it was 21 minutes for the car to get there, 43 minutes for public transport, and 44 minutes when I was cycling. And that's per journey. So home to work is one journey. So purely looking at time, you would consider the car the winner, right? But there is probably an asterisk with this. I leave very early. I leave at 6:30 a.m. to get to work. I did do it once during sort of peak hour, as we call it, and it was about 38 odd minutes, but I only did it once because I hated it. I was late to work and I was late home and I didn't really enjoy it. But going on the data that I have, let's call car the winner in sort of the time section. Now, next up is how is the hip pocket affected? What's the cost of your transport? I sort of started looking into this and it's a bit tricky to get a solid number. I looked at one test and they were comparing car and public transport, but they were comparing just the fuel cost and the train fare. But I don't know if that's entirely right, because I don't have to buy a train, right? I don't have to park a train or register it. Do I have to pay for the car itself, the fuel, registration, insurance, maintenance, parking, all of that stuff? That all starts to add up. So I did a little bit more digging, and I found that the average cost per year in Australia is $14,000 to drive to work. And that's not talking a fancy car either. It's a base model Corolla that's worth $28,000. So the cost of your commute almost exceeds half the value of your car in just 1 year. So that's a lot of money. And how much of your take-home pay is spent just getting to the thing that you're getting to earn money? If you break it down into the cost per day of how many work days there are, in order for me to drive to work, it's $30 a day. That's a bit of a moving target. And again, I'm in Australia. For the public transport, it was $5.12 a day, so quite a lot less than 30. And with cycling, it's kind of free. You have to charge the bike, so that was 10 cents a day. Oh, sorry, 10 cents each time you charge it. It would last a couple of days. You do have to consider maintenance, insurance, the initial cost of the bike, and it's electric, so it was a little bit more. But roughly $3 a day, assuming it lasts for about 5 years, right? So if cost is there, would be a draw between public transport and cycling, probably leaning more towards cycling. It's a bit cheaper, but you can have unexpected cost sort of pop up in that time, right? And that's where most research and articles tend to stop when they're looking at commuting. There's more to life though. Not everything revolves purely around time and money. And this is where I had a few other criteria that would help me sort of find the joy in commuting and look further than how it solely affected me. Now, it often feels as though we don't have enough free time in the day to do everything we want. And that's what the next criteria is going to look at. What could I get out of the activity that I'm already spending time doing? Now, driving's tricky, right? I can't knit, right? That would be tremendously dangerous. I can't use my phone. We have laws against that here, and I suspect it's the same where you are. Audio options are great. We have podcasts, music, and audio books. A colleague of mine told me this is their singing time. Now, I'm not personally one to sing in the car, but I do enjoy seeing people bust out their songs in the rear vision mirror from time to time. I found personally podcasts to be the best. If you're into programming, say Syntax FM, but it doesn't have to be, it can just be general stuff. I could listen while still concentrating on what I'm doing. Anything above that, I sort of found it difficult to concentrate on the drive. And so you're limited to what you can queue up before you start driving. This is where I think the big trick with public transport comes in, because you don't have to concentrate where anything is going. You just have to make sure you get off at your correct stop. And I've definitely missed it a couple of times, and it does add to your journey. So if you can get that right, it's good. Now, I've probably mentioned my child a couple of times at this point. When she was first growing up, we wanted to teach her sign language, specifically Australian Sign Language, or Auslan. The theory, in my experience, reality, is they can sign a lot sooner than they can talk, and it helps to avoid tantrums. Now, it varies when they can start speaking, but it's around 2-ish. It's not super important, but basically they can learn to sign before they can speak, right? So words such as food or milk, water. And if you'll indulge me for a second, just because I think it's cute, this is little Lara signing milk. Now, she's a little under 9 months at this point in time, and it wasn't until another good 10 months that she could verbally communicate with us. Regardless, right, it just takes time to learn something like that. And this is what I would do on the train in the morning. Now, it looked a little bit strange. I would read the book and practice the signs. But of course, you're not limited to sign language. You could start if you were interested in React or Vue or some other framework or programming language. You could spend that time learning that. There are apps like Duolingo or Khan Academy, anything that's going to give you a nice boost while you're traveling. That's the beauty of free time without responsibility. You have the ability to get in and learn something new. Now, the next one's close to my rule of not working, but I would start to plan my day. So this, for me, involved Todoist. I would open it up and outline what I needed to do for the day. That would be meetings or emails or projects, anything like that. Now, it's not, the important part though is once it's planned, don't do any of it, right? Especially email. That tends to be the one that always sneaks in when you're doing sort of travel or something like that. Not yet. The sole purpose here is to get it out of your head and onto whatever medium works for you, paper, an app, so you're no longer worrying about it. Now, I made another addition to this process after seeing this talk by Kylie Timpani. It's called Helping Yourself While Helping Others, and the YouTube link is just there. It's got a great decision tree in that talk that can help you if you sort of have trouble always saying yes to everything and sometimes forgetting your own energy, or own time and energy, sorry. But there was something in Kylie's talk that resonated with me. It was the idea of blocking out your calendar for the day. And there was obvious things like work and commute, but I also put in time for projects, my personal stuff, so that it was all in my calendar and ready to go. And this is what I would do in the morning on the train because I didn't like doing it for the whole week. And that gave me time to get my day sorted. So check out this talk from Kylie if you're interested, which with the extra free time on the train, you'll be able to do. Cycling, it's a little similar to driving. I can't read a book or knit. The guy on the unicycle, actually, he has free hands, right? He might be able to do that. But for the most part, you do have to concentrate, not quite as much as driving. There's less traffic. But it limits you to audio-based options as well. Podcasts and music were a favorite of mine. I would just put my headphones on and sort of see where the journey took me. The other great aspect, though, with cycling is it's very easy to stop and change direction. So particularly on the way home, so when you don't have as many time restrictions, I've helped someone chase down their dogs. I've stopped in at a cafe just for the hell of it, or shopping, especially with bike parking usually being at the front door here. But if not, a sturdy pole will do, right? So it's really easy to stop and change direction. There's a lot of freedom in that. So rounding out personal time, I really loved what the train and public transport offered. So that's sort of my winner there. Because I don't have to concentrate or steer. You're just on the journey to read, to learn, and explore, whatever you like. Now, work in this industry we know is very sedentary. We know the negative effect of sitting for too long. So the next criteria is looking at, well, what health benefits could be found in each method of commuting. In Australia, but exercise is exercise, right? I'm sure it's the same anywhere else. The recommendations for physical exercise are 150 to 300 minutes of moderate exercise. So that means walking, or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous exercise, so cycling or say team sports. That's roughly an hour a day if you break it out into your work week. And we already discussed being time poor. Exercise is one of those activities that slips away first, right? I'll definitely get onto this after the new year or in the new year. I'll just get through this project first, right? Once that's off my plate. And these are other great excuses that I've made to myself. So personally, I find it really difficult to exercise after work. I arrive home, I sit down and I think, well, I've had a really long day. I'm just going to sit for a bit and then I'll definitely exercise. And of course I don't, right? I never end up doing it. So as usual, we'll start with driving. With the watch, I was tracking 47 kilojoules of energy burnt, 0 hours of exercise, and 69 to 89 beats per minute for my heart rate. And the higher end there is probably more stress and not actual like exercise. With public transport, it's better. If you add in a walk especially or something like that, it's 348 kilojoules, 15 minutes of exercise, 64 to 88 beats per minute. I'm sure we guessed who was going to be the winner in this one, right? Cycling is 1,981 kilojoules, even with electric, 44 minutes of exercise, so the entire journey is exercise, 93 to 133 beats per minute. So you're reaching sort of a good exercise heart rate. Now, that's a massive increase over the other options, and you're definitely meeting the guidelines for vigorous exercise. But I find kilojoules a bit of a confusing metric. Like, what does that mean? So instead, I like to convert it into delicious snacks, right? That's much more relatable. If you meet me, maybe at those conferences, I'm a fan of donuts, right? Now, I know they're not good for me, but how many am I allowed depending on the different methods? Right? It's a good question. If you use a basic cinnamon donut, with driving, you can have 7% of one donut. with public transport, I can have 60% of one donut. Now, I don't have the self-control for either of those. If you do, well done. Cycling, I can have 3 and a bit donuts. Now, I probably only need 2, but I like the fact that I have one in reserve for those tough days, you know. So cycling takes out this section for health benefits, particularly if you don't eat the donuts, but even if you do, like there's good health benefits there. Now, I touched on mental health a little in the introduction and my desire to disconnect between home and office and vice versa. If you have a stressful morning or afternoon, you don't want to be bringing that into other environments. And we all have stuff going on in our lives, and it can be beneficial to take some time out and look after you. What benefits could be found from the 3 methods of transport? I couldn't really find those benefits with driving, right? I felt the same stress and frustration that sort of prompted me to do this test in the first place. There's lots of anger and rudeness on our roads. Perth is particularly well known for being terrible at merging, but I'm sure wherever you are, there's something that your driving community is known for being terrible at. For us, it's more about how you can be ahead of someone and not make the system work for everyone. So it's difficult to disconnect. And I also got to add a new column in my spreadsheet during driving. It was how many times I was flipped off. So it was three times. Now, nothing brings you the joy in the day than someone telling you where to go. I don't have a grade for driving because I couldn't find that space. Public transport, on the other hand, I would start my trip home with mindfulness exercises. In my case, I use Buddhify, but there's Calm Oak, there's plenty of apps that you can find. So doing some deep breathing and guided meditation. First 10 minutes of the trip is spent focusing on breathing and calming that sort of inner voice. And that would always make me feel much more relaxed. Cycling, we covered physical health, but it's important to note the direct link between exercise and improved mental health. And you can actually use mindfulness apps while you're cycling. It's called active meditation, I believe. But there was another surprising outcome for me with cycling and with public transport as well. This is where solutions would appear. So, you know, when you're, say, in the shower or I don't know, in bed at 3 a.m., right? And suddenly the solution to your coding problem appears. I need to add a semicolon or whatever it may be, right? This is where they would appear for me. Cycling and public transport gave my brain time to process solutions in the background. And it's where the idea for this talk came to be. Is that technically mental health? I would argue yes, because sometimes we get stuck ruminating on a coding problem that we're having, right? It's hard to get our brains off of that. So having time in your day to process in the background and come up with a solution gives you more mental space in the evenings, and I personally appreciated that. So who wins here? I would call it a draw between, say, cycling and public transport, right? Both offered really strong mental health benefits for me, but worth trying. Tangentially related, I think, to mental health is I would also have a look at the view while I was on my commute. Now, I mentioned we're particularly bad at merging here. This is a fantastic example of how bad we are at it. There's cars everywhere. There's red lights, weird bumper stickers, and someone flipping you off potentially, right? It's not great. Public transport, it's not particularly great either, right? It's the inside of a carriage, or you might see some cars, or here you can often see the river, or it'll be someone's armpit in your face, right? It's a lucky dip as to what you get with that. This is a part of my commute that I have while cycling. This is called Lake Munga here in Perth, Western Australia. That's our city in the background. Now that's much nicer, right? If you compare the two side by side, how much nicer is the cycling to the commute, to the car, sorry? How much more calm and relaxed are you going to be in the other one? There's even ducks in there, like that's calming. So the winner of the view criteria for me would be cycling. Now, I didn't have a measurable way of sort of testing environmental impact in the test, but I feel it's an important area, to touch on anyway. We know that petrol cars aren't great for the environment. Here in Australia, public transport is our second highest greenhouse gas polluter, emitting about 102 million tonnes of carbon dioxide last year. Now, we're a wealthy-ish country, right? So you might be wondering where we sit in the global rankings. We are 20th. We have less restrictions on transport pollution. We're a country mostly in love with cars. If you're interested, the top 3 are France, India, and Italy, so well done if you're in one of those countries. Down with us are Turkey, South Africa, and Thailand, so I guess welcome if you're down there with us. Now, we're a very large country. Everything is spread out. Combine that with our relatively low spend on public transport and cycling infrastructure, and that's how we find ourselves so low. It's estimated that our carbon emissions are going to be about 111 million tonnes by 2030. So we love cars, but we don't utilise them very well. 95% of the time, cars are parked doing nothing. There's substantial infrastructure to support parked cars. It's estimated that that infrastructure is 30,000 square kilometres of Europe, which is the size of Belgium. Right? So if you paved over Belgium, and just turned it into a car park, that's how much you would have in Europe. There's often valuable land right in the middle of cities, land that could be used for anything else, public spaces, parks, whatever. Often the cars have better infrastructure than we do for us. So what can we do by taking some of that space back? But also, what can you do personally, right? If you alone cycle 10 kilometers each way to work, you reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1,500 kilograms a year, which is quite good. That's just you. So I would call it a draw again between cycling and public transport. Both offer really reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Next, I wanted to look at safety. Right? Any form of transport comes with a risk. We've become a little bit distracted. We look at our phones a lot, not where we're going, or we're tired, or we have something on our mind, or through no fault of our own, something just goes wrong, whatever it may be. If you're familiar with Kent C. Dodds, he tweeted out this fact that 3,000 people a day die in car-related accidents, but that's globally. Here, we do a little bit better than that. We have 1,137 a year, but 930 of those are in cars, 35 are cyclists, but we have a lot less cyclists, right? So 35 is quite high. And 176 were just unlucky. They were just in the area as pedestrians. But we are improving. Even though any number above 0 is sad, we are getting better, but not because we're getting better at driving, because technology is better at protecting us. We've got higher safety standards. But the way I think we get that number to 0 is through automation. That's where we all come in. So much of what the cars do now is becoming automated. I don't have to turn my lights on or windscreen wipers or the temperature. It's all done for me. The only 2 things I control are the most dangerous in speed and direction. So I'd be happy to have those taken off my hands. So I'm not going to pick a winner here. I think we just need to look out for each other, have a little more patience. And if you're stuck behind a slower car or a bike, just bust out your favorite song and while we make progress towards automating. So let's wrap up my findings for this test. The car is the fastest, kind of, if you leave early. It's also the most expensive though, with an average of about $14,000. And it didn't fulfill any of my other criteria. And I'm definitely not holding a grudge, but I was flipped off 3 times. Public transport, it's cheap, it's relatively safe. I'm talking safe as in during peak time, but that's safe for me here. You sort of decide on what safety means for you where you are. But I love the free time, the ability to get in and learn or do other things. But the scheduling can be a little bit tricky. Cycling, you're well and truly going to meet your exercise goals for the day. It's cheap, ideas come to you, but it is the slowest option. So I've run through a bit of an analytical and emotional look at how I tested my commute, highlighting sort of areas that improved and ways that I could further improve my journey. If you have to travel, then you should make it the best possible journey for you, right? But what do I do now? A mixture, right? Like all things, especially programming, there's no single solution that's completely correct, right? For me, I'm going to continue primarily with cycling and public transport because they fit the most of the criteria that I set. And they benefit more than me, but the community as well. I still drive on occasion. That is unavoidable here. I may have to pick something up like my child, but it'll be the last option that I have. I'm happier, healthier, more engaged in mind and body just by changing up how I commute. And it's sort of difficult to give that away for the sake of 20 minutes. Since changing my primary commute, I average putting fuel in my car once every 2 months. Now, I'm sure the cost of fuel everywhere is quite high, but that is a massive saving. And as a little bit of a personal achievement, I managed to reach 1,000 kilometers on my bike, which I was pretty chuffed about. As someone that wasn't cycling before, that felt like a good little goal. So if you're interested in giving this a try, here are some tips to get the most out of your alternative options. With public transport, it pays to play around with where you depart from. There's a bus terminal at the front of my house, but if I get that, I've only got one chance every 30 minutes to get the bus. If I walk 200 meters down the street, I have 4 chances every 30 minutes to get a bus. And what you can also look at is GPS tracking, right? So we've just added GPS tracking to our buses, so you can see exactly where they are. You can make a fun game of leaving your house and walking to the bus stop and hopping straight on the bus. But have a look at it, or give your public transport authority a look at our app, because it's quite cool. JavaScript, right? So think of public transport like the JavaScript event loop. As programmers, we start to think about how we can improve our code to meet the system, right? Not about how the system can meet our needs. So as the public transport is all looping away, you start to get a feel of how that system works and you optimize for that system. And it's the same for public transport. If you can optimize your path to match up with it quite well, you'll have less friction there. With cycling, start small. I mentioned I had no interest in physically training to get to work. So start with a day or 2 a week and adjust as you can. There's no pressure. Cheat, right? Go electric, get an electric bike or scooter or equivalent. Encourage your work to create facilities to support cyclists. If they need a good reason, people who cycle or use other means of transport are half as likely to have sick days as those that don't. But most importantly, have fun with it. Don't solely focus on time. Focus on how you're feeling and what you're getting out of it. Right? You'll definitely do the exercise in the afternoon because you're now trapped at work, and that's very motivating. Right? And you're also going to save a fortune on coffee because you're so awake by the time you get to work, you might not even need it. It might be a stretch for some people, but you can dream. But here's my challenge to everyone that's here today. Give it a try. See where you can improve your commute. Add fun and excitement and health benefits to your journey. Put down infinite scrolling apps and play around with the suggestions in this talk, or find something that sparks an interest for you. Do infinite scrolling apps. Like I said, I'm not here to judge. But most of all, find the joy in your journey. If you're interested in the resources that I've used, you can probably grab a quick screenshot of these, or you can see me on Twitter at AntonJB there, and I can send you more information. But otherwise, thanks very much for listening. And as I mentioned, AntonJB on Twitter. If you have any questions, I believe you can put them into the question area there. Wait and see. All right. Well, doesn't seem like we have questions. So I think we can probably wrap it up there then if no one has any. Feel free to reach out and I hope you enjoyed the talk. Thanks very much.